Good afternoon, it's Dan Howe, PTI Securities and Futures, coming to you on Tuesday, December 20th. Overnight, the S&P had a relatively narrow range, only 15 points overnight, which is much lower than the average 20 for the past month or so. The foreign markets were mixed in both Asia and in Europe, so there really was no reason to believe that things were going to go that well. All of our 15 points were pretty much to the upside. When we came in this morning, they were up about 9 or 10. Then the housing starts and the housing permits came in, they both were very good. Much better than expected, and percentage-wise, they're up about 10%. Realistically, when housing numbers get this low, or when any number gets this low, thinking of it in terms of percentage is very misleading. So that 10% was a lot more, it seemed a lot better than it actually was. And the market went up another 3 or 4 points. We opened up, the S&P is up about 15, and we really never looked back. During the course of the day, the market traded further up. The only real fundamental news was that there was a decent Spanish auction in Europe, so that was actually pretty good. It's unclear how much of the buying that was done by the ECB, so realistically you got to take those numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt. So, you know, yesterday we started off with a fairly decent rally and we were sold into the North Korean news. Today, absolutely not one word about North Korea. So realistically, we didn't have any negative on the opening, and I think there are people out there that want to run this market up by the end of the year. However, we closed pretty much close to our high. The SPX closed up 35 at 1241, very positive day. The Dow closed up 335 points, well back above the 12,000 level, closing at 12,101. The NASDAQ up 80 to 2663. The dollar sold off pretty good here today. It sold off down 59, so dollar composite closed at 79.87. That was really a fuel for a lot of commodities, and also was kind of bad for the bonds and good for the yield. The 10-year yield closed up 11 basis points to 1.92, so it's still well below 2, but on the other hand, a very positive day for the yield and a negative day for the bonds. Gold up 19, also due to the weak dollar, and oil closed up 3 to $97. So realistically, all the commodity trade, all the risk trade was back on because of the rally in this and decrease in the dollar. Don't have much in the way of news tomorrow. We have a little bit more of the housing news, which once again is not that significant to us anymore. The big day of the week is Thursday. We got let's see, we got Michigan sentiment, we got GDP, we got the leading indicators all coming out on Thursday, and on Friday we do have some personal income and personal spending, but Friday will be a very light day, probably even lighter than yesterday and today. Both yesterday's down and today's up. Very little volume, so it's very difficult to make any conclusions going forward, other than the fact that we did end up on a very positive note today. So Dan Howe, PTI Securities and Futures.